So the other changes that I'm making on this boat, Pelagiac makes a autopilot, electric autopilot that you hook up to the monitor wind vane. Uses very little power. It's very small, and it will hold a course using your wind vane if there's no wind. So I'm gonna get that, but not right now, because I already have the Ray Marine one. So we'll see how that goes. The other thing that I did is I am installing, and actually it's mostly finished now, my Katadyn Power Survivor 40E water maker that I had on Wandering Dolphin. All of these things will have videos. I've got the content from all the work that I've done so far. So stay tuned for those videos when they come out. But suffice it to say that the water maker, that little one, it makes 1.5 gallons an hour on a good day. Doesn't make a lot of water, but only draws between 4 and 5 amps, which is the amount that a normal refrigerator will draw. We used to fill our boat, keep our boat topped off while we were anchored out on Wandering Dolphin with just the solar. It provided all of the water that a whole family of 7 needed living on the boat in the Caribbean. Now, that was in the Caribbean. The solar was good. There was lots of sun. And I would run it for 4 or 5 hours a day with that many people on board. Obviously, with 2 people on board, I'm not going to need to run the water maker quite as often. But the other thing is, the water makers in general, they need to be used. If they're not used, that's when you start having problems with them. That's when you start, the maintenance goes way up. If you're just turning it on once a week, or even, you know, every other day or so for like 15-20 minutes, they don't like that. They like to be run. They like to be used. They work much better if they run for a few hours at a time. So I anticipate that on this boat, I will probably have to run it probably 2-3 hours a day, maybe at least 2 hours a day, probably every day, in order to keep up with the usage of the water. Not that there isn't tanks on this boat. Obviously, I'm not going to go offshore relying only on a water maker for my water, but there isn't a lot. There's 2 20-gallon tanks, one on each side, in the aft cabin, and then I've also added a 10-gallon tank down where the diesel tank used to be. The diesel tank had a leak in it. That's something that happens with old North Sea 27s. They get leaks in the engine, or in the diesel. It had that. So instead of removing the whole old tank, since I wasn't going to need a tank down there anyway, what I did, and in retrospect, I should have removed it, and then I should have had a poly tank made and just use it as a water tank. And that may be something I actually will do in the future, but instead I put a bladder in there. And then I also use that tank for storage for heavy extra chain and other things that are, I actually have a very large Fortress anchor as a storm anchor for this boat as well. And it comes apart into smaller sections, and it goes down in there as well. So that's what I'm using the former diesel tank for. I made a lid for it, and yeah. So the tankage on the boat for water is, at this point, it's about 50 gallons, which is actually not too bad for a small boat like this. But then I'll also take, that is one area where I'll carry a couple of jerry jugs, and I'll put them up on deck. I may just get gallon jugs and put them down in storage down below, because I hate having stuff on deck. Then I also have a composting head. I got a Nature's Head. I tried to order a Sea Head, and that's a whole, when I do the video about the Nature's Head and explain it, I will discuss the Sea Head. I don't recommend the company, I'll put it that way. They were not a good company to deal with for me. I've heard other people say they've had great, I can only speak for me and my experience. But anyway, I hope that they've improved, and I hope that people are not getting having a bad situation with them. But Nature's Head, so far, love it. It's the design of it is really great, and I have a friend that also put an airhead instead on his boat, and he really likes it. And there are some advantages to the airhead for a North Sea that I think you might want to consider instead of a Nature's Head. Nature's Head, I basically have to move the toilet out in order to get it out to dump it. I have to move it away from the wall, whereas the airhead folds the other way, and it's easier to access that stuff. So I kind of wish I would have gotten an airhead for this particular installation, but I do like the Nature's Head. So the composting head is a big thing on a small boat like this because there is no tankage for sewage. If you're going to pump over everywhere, you know that would work, but obviously there are places that you can't pump overboard, and there are places that you certainly wouldn't want to pump overboard anyway. I am not opposed to pumping overboard offshore at all, but obviously beautiful little harbors. We went through a great deal of effort when we lived on Wandering Dolphin to never pump in. Yeah, you don't want to shit where you eat. So, but yeah, that's one of the changes I made on this boat as well. So I've got the water maker, refrigerator. The other thing that I did is I moved the plumbing. The galley plumbing for this boat went from the galley underneath the stove, from the sink underneath the stove and into the engine compartment, and that's where the through hull fitting was for the drain for the sink, the galley sink. And it went through some areas where it would have to go up and down and up and down, and obviously what happens when you have that situation, there's no place, you don't want any place where stuff can collect, especially from a galley sink. Stuff is gonna go down that, and you know, it's gonna build up in those spots, and then it just gets smaller and smaller until finally you can't drain your sink. So what I did is I moved that through hull. I got rid of that through hull, and I made the through hull directly under the sink itself. It's very accessible and easy to shut off and open. Obviously when you're sailing, in this case on the starboard side, so when you're on a port tack and you're heeled over to the starboard, if you have that through hull open, seawater is going to flow up through that into the sink, and you're going to have seawater in the sink. It won't sink the boat. Obviously when you're sailing, you just close the through hull, and you won't get seawater backing up into the sink. But the nice thing is it's a straight shot down, so it's easy to clean out. It does have two sinks, and there's a Y, and in the middle of that Y I bought a special Y that you can remove the facing on it, and you can actually clean that out, and then you could just snake right straight through overboard. So it's very simple maintenance on that. And then I did add an electric water pump on this boat. It just had a manual foot pump for seawater, and then a hand pump for freshwater. The hand pump now goes directly to the new tank that I've hooked up the water maker to. So the water maker water doesn't go into the main tanks; it only goes to that one tank, and then that one tank has a pump, a hand pump. It's also so right now the electric pump goes to both of the side main tanks, water tanks, and the way it's designed right now, the only way to get water from the main tanks is through the electric pump. But all of those fittings are under the galley sink, which is very accessible and easy to work on. And if for some reason my electric pump failed, I can just undo the manual pump from the little tank for the water maker, and I can hook it up to the main tanks in about 10 minutes, and then all the main tanks can use that same pump, that little manual pump. Or I could change the seawater pump. I could turn off the seawater pump valve, and I could use the seawater pump as the pump for the main tanks. So I've got a redundancy. So I do have three I have 3 faucets now at the sink, the galley sink. I have one for salt water, one for fresh water, manual. Both of those are manual, and then I have an electric for the freshwater big tanks. One of the big changes I made was I've eliminated all of the mounted electronics, and by that what I mean is I don't have a chart plotter that's mounted anymore. I specifically got rid of all that stuff. So I have a Furuno First Watch radar that goes directly through Wi-Fi to my phone or my iPad. And I have Vesper AIS right there. And it transmits and receives, and it also sends out a signal to my my iPad, my computer, or my phones. 5 different devices. My crew can also use their own phone to receive AIS in the cockpit. So radar is Wi-Fi, AIS is Wi-Fi, and then I use Navionics on all of my iOS devices for my main chart plotter. And I've delivered more boats than I can count, offshore sailboats, to and from the Caribbean for years. And I've used every chart plotter that I think is made. I've used Furuno chart plotters, I've used Simrad, Raymarine, a ton of Raymarine, B&G. I don't have anything against any of those, but especially on a small boat like this, simple is good. And in the end, when we left St. Thomas to sail our own boat, Wandering Dolphin, 10,000 miles total offshore to the Pacific Northwest, I used my Navionics and my iPad and my phone for that. And in the end, the last couple of years that I was down there, that I was doing deliveries, I didn't even care what the boat had for chart plotters. I didn't use them. Unless they were connected to the autopilot, then I would sometimes use them. But I still, even on those passages, I used my own Navionics on my iPad and my phone for my navigation. And I mean, I don't really want to get into all that right now, but I will mention that I do use paper charts on a limited amount. I keep a paper chart of the entire voyage, a large scale paper chart, and I do mark my position on it every 24 hours. I do a fix, and that's something I keep a running fix on a paper chart, but it's certainly not my main navigation at all. The other thing that I have is of course the Iridium Go, and I also have an InReach, a Garmin InReach, which also both of those send the information to your phone or your iPad or your computer. I do have a Mac as well. Now, for backup with the Navionics, in case for some reason something happened with my Navionics account while I'm offshore, I also use iNavX on my computer, just on the computer, and with that you can upload the actual charts onto the computer through iNavX, and I go ahead and pay for that service as well, so I can use it as a backup to Navionics in case something happens with Navionics. As far as a GPS, I've got the InReach, obviously is a GPS as well. Then for my AIS, it's hooked to a separate GPS, and then also my Standard Horizon radio has a separate GPS. Even though I could piggyback the GPS from the Vesper to the VHF, I don't. I have 2 because I could just interchange them if I want. If one of them failed, something happens, I don't know, and one of those antenna fails, I could switch it to the other, and then I could, like, if the Vesper's GPS goes out for some reason, I can change it from and use the one from the VHF radio for the Vesper AIS, and then I could just piggyback with the VHF into the AIS, so it still works. It gives me a redundancy there as well with the fixed GPS antennas. But I also use a Bad Elf little puck. It's called Bad Elf. They're amazing. They connect to your iOS devices through Bluetooth, and that's my main GPS for my Navionics on my iPad and my phone. A very good GPS, super fast. So so I've done that. I've also got Nav Lights. I've changed out all the Nav Lights to LED, Hella Marine LED lights. All of my navigation lights, etc., are here now. I am redoing all the lights on the boat. They had the old style aquamarine lights that are just terrible. The bulb is put in upside down so that water, when it inevitably gets into the housing, won't be pooling around the base of the bulb. So they plan to have, they engineer it assuming that their housing is going to fail, and then the gravity just pulls on the bulb and causes it to short out often after a very short time. They're really terrible. I don't even know why they can still sell anything. They're horrible. So long ago, actually probably 15 years ago, these Hella Marine lights came out. They are vacuum sealed inside a completely sealed compartment, and we had them on Wandering Dolphin for years without one light ever going out or giving us any issues. We had their tricolor as well. This is the newer version of what we had. We had a much smaller one on Wandering Dolphin, but again, it's completely a sealed unit, and they're very bright. The draw on them is so low that when the anchor light, this is the tricolor light, when the anchor light was on, we actually could hardly tell a draw on the batteries at all. And then these are the spreader lights. So I'll walk through all of the lights that I've got. This is the Hella Marine stern light. By the way, Hella Marine makes other products and lights that are not of the quality of these ones, and the cost shows that. They're more like the regular aqua signal lights, and the quality is not good on them. So it's not just that they're Hella Marine lights, but Hella makes these ones that are awesome. So each of these cost about $100, so that's why but you get what you pay for. These I've had the other ones on the other boat for 15 years with not one of the lights giving me any issues. So this is the stern light, starboard nav light, port nav light, masthead light, or steaming light, whichever you want to call it. And then this is the tricolor, which you use only for sailing. When I'm offshore, this is the one that's on. And then it also includes the anchor light. So you can flip to the anchor light when you're in anchorage. And yeah, it's super bright. Wonderful, wonderful product. And then these are my spreader lights. And these are not Hella. I got these on Amazon, and they're made for off-road. They were not expensive, but they are very bright. I've used them before on a Jeep that I had, and they won't be in the salt. They will be in the salt air, and I'm sure they'll get some salt on them, but they are made to be outside. But I'm sure they're not going to last years and years and years, but the price shows that as well. I think these were 40 bucks, so $20 each. They're not a pricey unit, but they are very bright. I'll have one pointing forward on the spreader light and one aft, so I can light up the whole boat if I want to with those. So that is the nav lights that I'm going to be installing here pretty soon. So those are the changes that I've made to this boat. I can't think of any others right off the top of my head, but stay tuned. Like, subscribe, keep following it, and pretty soon here we're going to start getting into some of the videos, and you can start seeing the things that I've done. Thanks a lot. Come back next week.
So